All right. Hey, Facebook Live, welcome. We got a real life time traveler here with us, Trevor Haldenby. How you doing, man?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing good. He comes to us from the future. There is a funny Hulu show, or I think it was NBC, on time travelers, and there was like a professor, a reluctant professor that gets sucked back in time, and some
Yes.
really silly. I just really like that show. I haven't followed it. I think it got a little tiring, but it was like time travelers or something. Do you know which one I'm talking
I
about?
do. I forget what it's called too, but it's very significant in 2036. It's a meaningful cultural artifact from the distraught times in which we find ourselves at
Oh my
present.
gosh. Well, the present, are we living in a dystopian present in your opinion, or do you see it some other way?
So it's an interesting question
We're
because
not really, we're not on the talk right now. This is just real interesting banter. So,
somebody's dystopia is always somebody else's utopia. And that other person's utopia is somebody else's nightmare or idea of hell on earth. So the reality is that we're always living in both at the same time. And the temptation that human beings have, especially in this social and political climate, seems to be to polarize ourselves and say either this is the best time to be alive ever, or this is the worst time to be alive ever. And the reality is that we live in this gray zone in the middle where for some people, this is certainly the best time to be alive. For others, it's the worst. Don't be an endangered primate right now or an amphibian. This is a bad time to be alive if you're an amphibian. It's very sad.
all right. Well, we got some words of wisdom from Trevor Haldenby. I just can't wait to do this. If you can give me a 5 count, Trevor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right. We're going to rock this thing in 3, 2. We are live with Trevor Haldenby. Trevor, are you ready to talk?
I'm always ready to talk. I'm also ready to listen. So I hope we can do a bit of both over the next little while.
Let's do it. Trevor Haldenby is a complexity guy and a time traveler from the future of business who writes very, very brief bios, I'll say right now. Trevor Haldenby, welcome to the talk.
Thank you so much, Nathan. It's nice to be here.
Your talk is called Bringing the Future to Life. I love the mashup word that you use, simplexity, simple complexity. You talk about chaos theory. You talk about your hobby since you're a little kid of building time machines and basically focusing on the eventuality of science, not science fiction, but science eventuality. Please take us, Trevor, behind the talk.
Sure. So science eventuality is a Steven Spielbergism. And that was a really important term for me to come across when I was about 11 years old. I was obsessed with all things Jurassic Park. And now as an adult, looking back at that time, Jurassic Park's still cool. Jurassic World, not so much. But I was trying to figure out for myself what was so important about that book and what was so important about that film. What made it sticky? And what I found for myself is that it was an experience, reading the book, watching the film, that occurred in the present. And it was about the future of biotechnology, the future of genetic engineering, the future of business, gone horribly awry in that case. But it also did this really good job of bracketing. I'm a photographer as well. So photographers know, especially in the age of HDR, or high dynamic range photography, that you can get a perfect shot by bracketing your exposure, by taking 3 pictures instead of one that's underexposed, one that's just right, and one that's overexposed. Then you can put them all together. And Jurassic Park is kind of like an auto exposure bracketing book. It's about the present. It's about the ongoing challenges and ethical dilemmas that humanity faces. It's about the future we're moving into, which we see as dominated by technology, but it's also about the past. And what I got out of reading Jurassic Park was this idea that you can play with all 3 of those things simultaneously. You can be in the present. You can hearken back to the things that have made humanity human for thousands of years, the stories we tell, the way that we imagine alternative scenarios. And you can make those about the future. Now, I'm a strategic foresight professional, which some people shorten and abbreviate into futurist. I'm a team futurist rather than an individual futurist. So I believe this is a team contact sport not something that is best done in isolation. Most of the futures work I see from the traditions of scenario planning, particularly, which has been going on for 40 or 50 years now, are these really bold ideas about the future. What does space exploration look like a generation from now? How do we get a clean energy economy up and running? What does it mean, or what would it look like to have a truly equitable society for all people? Most of the work that gets done on these really important ideas is done in the form of double-spaced text on a white page that sits on the binder on a bookshelf of like a policy advisor or a president or a thought leader or a guru or something, or a strategist. And while fiction has an enormous power to motivate people, to help people imagine what could be, what should be, what might be different from the world of today, I think it's pretty hard to ignore as you walk around the streets of a city, as you look at what happens in the living rooms and in the technology in the pockets of people these days, that written fiction just doesn't cut it anymore. And so we've done ourselves a little bit of a disservice in the profession of strategic foresight by writing it down and double spacing it and putting it in binders for 50 years. And what my talk was about was asking a question of whether we could really transform the way we think about and make changes that play out in the future by not writing it down or creating pictures of it, but by simulating it in a really immersive and interactive and experiential way. When I was in the midst of the research that I was doing at OCAD University here in Toronto that led to my TEDx talk, I cracked open a fortune cookie that had a lovely little message inside that I'd seen 100 times before. It's a quote often attributed to the philosopher Confucius that I hear and I forget. I see and I remember, but it's when we do that we truly understand. And if you look across professions, across industries, across hobbies, you find all kinds of people doing to truly understand what they're capable of, what the world needs right now, and how a thing should work. Actors rehearse, athletes train, soldiers drill. But when you look into the business world particularly, when it comes to making a strategy, when it comes to planning for the future, imagining what the future could be, there isn't much of an appetite or a habit there for simulation, for rehearsal, for training, for practice. And I found that very kind of disturbing.
So, Trevor, how do we practice the future? I love this idea of simulation, of getting involved, making it real contextual instead of being on a binder with all the other binders. It's almost like that Indiana Jones at the end. They put the Ark of the Covenant up in its storage, and it looks like every other box out there, which is the most blasphemous thing ever if you really understand the meanings of it. How can we get out of something where the most amazing things that we're heading into are completely irrelevant because it's commoditized and filed away? How do we practice the future?
So before I got into the strategic foresight game, which had been like a hobby of mine and an interest of mine as far back as I can remember, starting with reading science fiction as a kid, I worked in game design and experience design and in the theater, designing great experiences that help people engage with the meaning of something rather than the facts and figures and statistics of something. And what I kept thinking of as I was studying to become a futurist and coming across more and more of these written double-spaced scenario plans was this idea that if we took the language of the experience of alternate reality games, of immersive theater, shows like Sleep No More that you can see in New York, of massively multiplayer online role-playing games where people really get into the story, contribute to it, feel like they're a meaningful part, a character in the story, not just a spectator of it. My hypothesis was if you applied that to a conversation about the future, you could create a whole new level of meaningful engagement with the ideas, critical or ecstatic, that are being discussed. And so in 2012 and 2013, I launched a company that did that, called The Mission Business. The Mission Business's purpose was to take that language of augmented reality, alternate reality, game design, of role-playing games, and try to apply that to a future about the world of biotechnology, so that people wouldn't be reading about how technologies are going to transform their lives, and they wouldn't be looking just at cool mock-ups of like, here's what the pill of the future would look like. Here's what the person of the future might look like. Our goal was to plant people directly into the middle of a world, of a whole universe, where everything in the scenarios was taken as true, was the rules of the operating system of that world. Over the course of 2012, exploring the scenario about the future of lifestyle biotech, what it'll mean to augment ourselves, to rewire the operating system in our brains and in our social networks, using corporate products. We tried very hard to look at all of the different experiential pieces and levers of what that would actually mean for a person. If you went to a party with 15 people who were taking love drugs that rewired their pheromonal systems to not only make them attractive to other people, but allow them to like invisibly diagnose other people in the room for sexually transmitted diseases, for compatibility as a mate, for similar interests and hobbies, what would that actually look and feel like? And what would it take to get people to put a pill that does that in their mouths and swallow it down and believe maybe for a couple of hours that it was real? Well, if it's a corporation selling you that product, they're going to have social media accounts. They're going to have on-street like activation teams. There's going to be a CEO who's a little bit morally questionable, but does what the market wants to hear. And so rather than writing down those things, we brought them to life. We brought together a team of about 50 actors to play the leadership team, as well as the protesters against this fictional company from the future called Biologic, and played it out over the course of about 9 months in a series of live action events where for 2, 3, 12 hours at a time, people would live and breathe inside a world where the scenario about the future of rewiring our DNA in order to be better, stronger, cooler people was real. And when you're faced with the kind of ethical dilemmas that are often written down on a page in real life, I think you learn something very different about what they mean to you. You have a lived experience, whether it's a simulated and fictional real lived experience or not. It's an experience that touches all your senses, and it reminds you of the consequences of what happens when we let an idea that sounds really good into the world and play out the implications of it. Who has and who doesn't have access to these products? What sort of a disadvantage does that put the people who can't afford or get access to these products that modify their DNA to make them more special? What does that feel like when you don't have access to that? What would it feel like to protest the company that is bringing this stuff to market aggressively and without much care for the implications of who does and does not have access to this? What if the company was hiding something from you, like the fact that their products had really nefarious side effects that would screw up your life and your body? What would it feel like to realize that you were being lied to? And so over the course of about 9 months, we brought somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 people into this experience where they were meeting characters, playing the head of research and development or marketing, even janitorial services for this fictional company from the future. And rather than reading the white paper, they were getting into a conversation about the ethical, the moral, the technological implications of these changes that are coming at us really fast by living through them. What we found by surveying people and by interviewing people who'd been a part of these events, as well as encouraging them to tweet from within the world as these like theatrical performances unfolded one after another, is that it was prompting a really powerful ability to critically reflect on what these technologies might mean before they come to market. We were giving people an opportunity, not like an actor does, to rehearse what they should do when something happens, but to pre-rehearse what it could mean for them, and to give people an opportunity and a head start, maybe 2 or 3 or even 15 years in advance, to try a future on for size and see what it meant for them. And what we learned is that a lot of people were really critical of what we imagined to be the most likely scenario for a mass market genetic re-engineering of ourselves as a species. Corporations shouldn't be in control of that re-engineering. Or if they are, they should be very open, not very closed, contrary to how we see many corporations behaving in the pharma space and in technology products today and around social media platforms too. Another thing that we found is that there's a really powerful opportunity when you make the future playful and make it a story that people can experience for themselves, to get away from this trope that is often associated with the future, that the best thing we can do about the future is predict it. And towards a new mindset where the best thing you can do to prepare for the future is not to predict it, but is to pluralize it, to stop thinking about there being a single future and start thinking about there being an infinite number of possible futures that are determined and that are less or more likely over the course of the time frame you're considering, 5, 10, 15 years, based not on just the trajectories of technologies maturing and the dropping price of gene sequencing, for example, but based on their actions. The idea that we vote for futures with our actions every day as consumers, as parents, as friends, as employees, sounds to me sort of like an obvious idea, but to a lot of people who are participating in our events around this fictional company Biologic, there was a bit of an epiphany aha moment that the future is the sum total of your actions, your opinions, and your interactions with other people in the world. It's what we make of it. And that was new and sometimes kind of unsettling, but usually pretty exciting for people. People who maybe hadn't ever been involved in an activist movement before. I think part of what we gave the public here in Toronto when we were running these events was the opportunity to see what it might be like to be an activist in the year 2025, 2026, where we're trying to develop policy and develop regulations around who gets to modify their genetic code. To what end? Does that make them more successful in business, in their personal lives? And what are the unforeseen consequences of that when you sign your genetic code over to a private corporation? Is it worth it?
That sounds interesting.
It was so much fun. And well, we did a lot of disturbing things to try and, though I mentioned in our conversation before we went live that the future is neither utopian or dystopian. It's always going to be sort of a mashup of gray in the middle because someone else's utopia is someone else's dystopia. We pushed things to extremes on both ends. The promise of a utopia from a company is very seductive and very attractive, but the reality can often be dystopian. I just saw a comment pop up. It's Truman Show mixed with the Matrix. That's a very good combinatorial label for what we were doing. I could black
powerful stuff.
All day.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's powerful stuff. And as Trevor mentioned, what's the future like? Is it a dystopian? Is it a negative future? Is it an optimistic future? Who's in charge of that future? Well, you might believe somebody else is, or you might believe that you are. So we're here to say we believe that you're in charge of your future. And it's really interesting hearing how Trevor has essentially put together a time machine through a social construct of experiences and simulations to really paint a picture of how we might act. Think about a flash mob that's a little bit more scripted, giving you elements of what could be in the future. So we've been enjoying this talk with Trevor Haldenby. His talk is called Bringing the Future to Life. We're going to pivot for a very rapid blitz round in just a moment. And we're back with the blitz round with Trevor Haldenby. I'm going to ask Trevor just a couple of either or questions related to the prep and performance of his talk. Trevor, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I applied to speak at the TEDx event at my alma mater, OCAD University, Canada's oldest art and design school, here in Toronto, Canada.
Any advice for other people who are applying?
A million pieces of advice. The biggest one, and I now work as a speaker coach at TEDx Toronto, which is one of the largest TEDx events in North America. We just had our event a week and a half ago with 14 amazing speakers. And the speakers that we brought up on stage, the speakers that we invited to come and present at the event, are the ones who had the clearest articulation of an idea. And I would say that that's the easiest thing to overlook in the TEDx application process. You're asked, what is your idea worth spreading? And most people immediately bypass that and say, well, I'm a really important person and I've got this great point of view and I've got this interesting collection of life experiences and I want to tell my story. And that's not what we're looking for at a TEDx event. We're looking for an idea that people can take away and do something with. And for me as a speaker, that was certainly the hardest part, was getting away from a collection of anecdotes and like historical milestones that led me to that moment and towards this idea that time machines don't always look like the thing in an H.G. Wells novel. Most of the time, the most interesting and useful time machines look like groups of people creatively engaging in an imaginative and playful activity. That's where the future comes from.
Trevor, that's a really important point because a lot of times I review a lot of talks to select, who comes on the talk and who I'm going to reach out to and whatnot. It's really a fine line between kind of a glorified commercial for ourselves versus a true idea worth spreading. And so, sometimes a lot of people breach that line. What's something that we can do to stay on the idea side of the line?
Always be thinking about the takeaway for your audience. It's so easy to think about the experience you want to have on stage, about the words that need to come out of your mouth. But the most important thing to think about when you're coming up with the stories you want to tell in your talk, when you're distilling your idea down into something super concentrated and digestible, is asking yourself, what are people going to do when they leave this room? Am I giving them a prompt? Am I helping people understand what they might do with this information? Or am I just fire hosing them and hoping that it looks cool? And a lot of people fall into the latter camp. But to take a designerly approach in the spirit of the D in TEDx, put your audience first. Think about the value to your audience of your idea and what it might mean for 5, 6, 100 different kinds of people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, from different communities to do something with that idea. And if you find that you're struggling, it's not your fault. You're not uninteresting. Probably just need to do more work concentrating and distilling the idea.
Well, we've been enjoying this Blitz round with Trevor Haldenby. Again, his talk is called Bringing the Future to Life. You can find out more about him over at trevorhaldenby.com, and we will have a link on our show notes page to his website as well as his talk, Bringing the Future to Life. Just go to bethetalk.com, and we'll be back in just a moment with the final word of advice. And we're back with Trevor Haldenby. What is the final word of advice?
Be a combination of yourself and who you want to be. A lot of TEDx coaches, when working with their speakers, and I've experienced this myself, there's a temptation to try and present a snapshot of the person as they are now as the foundation for the idea that they're spreading and putting out into the world. The TEDx talk is a very interesting opportunity to take an aspirational and imaginative moment of reflection on yourself. Who do you want to be in the futures? Who might you want to be? And how can you set the stage for maybe where you want to be 10 or 15 years from now with the talk, with the artifact that you're creating, as well as the experience and interaction that you're having with an audience? You can take the future-facing perspective to the design of your TEDx talk. The timeline doesn't have to end 18 minutes after you start. That's not like the cap on where you're allowed to reflect on your experience. You can be future you, and you can imagine where the talk might take you and bring little pieces of that, little bits of aspirational language into your talk. It'll make it easier for you to deliver an engaging and exciting experience on stage. And it will make it easier for people to walk out of your talk saying, wow, that idea was really interesting, bringing the future to life. What would that look like for me? What kind of a time machine could I design with my family, with my friends, with my coworkers, with my mentors that would help us mature, help us blossom, help us become what we want to become?
Well, Trevor Haldenby, thank you so much for this look into the future. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe today.
Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap.
Now do we get to talk for an hour?
Talk for an hour? Well, we're supposed to have another guest, and I don't see her, so maybe we can.
So how long have you been doing this, Be the Talk?
Oh, I started it in February. We've gone 7 days a week ever since.
And what was the moment that made you realize this is what you had to do or wanted to do?
Yeah, I think stepping off stage of my own talk, and I said, there needs to be more of a resource than just listening to podcasts that have, rebroadcast podcasts from TED and whatnot. I just realized there needed to be a better resource out there for people.
Did you have a coach for your talk?
Oh, sure.
And was that a good experience for you?
Yeah, it was a good experience. I think, I have a multiplicity of different coaches out there, including speaker coaches. So the one that was provided for me, it was a little bit more of a situation where they were managing everybody else, and they were pretty happy. It was almost like a binary. It was kind of like, you're good. And so I had to kind of take it upon myself, as well as some of my other resources, to upgrade it, which is why I always recommend, get a speaker coach, play nice with the other coaches you might be assigned, but make sure that you're walking out there and you know what to do, and that you've got feedback on that.
Yeah, that you've been challenged.
Yeah.
The hardest thing to do with a good and interesting speaker is to challenge them.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to break something that already works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, and there's that line where if they over rehearse, I mean, you do need to, I mean, and I don't know if you buy that, or you've heard that mantra that the average person works about 50 hours at least on their successful talk. But I think a lot of that is just honing the idea, reflecting, talking to people, as opposed to rigid performance of it. What are your thoughts on that?
At TEDx Toronto, we've found, I work with 4 other speaker coaches. It's probably the best team I've ever worked on. We bring a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of expertise, diversity of interests to the table. And it's the same group of people that program the event that then go on to coach 2 to 3 speakers each for, like, as you described, 50 to 100 hours of work.
Yeah. Well, how big's the venue over there?
About 1,500 people.
1,500. Okay. So it's actually becoming, I mean, that's large. That's large. And there are other venues that I talk to that are even larger, but that's pretty large. So it's you've been doing this for a while, obviously.
Yeah. So we start with a formula that is not all that different from what the gospel of the TED brand is, that you figure out your idea. You figure out the stories, the facts, the examples, the images that are going to support your idea and help people see your point of view and maybe apply it to themselves. Then you write an outline, and then you write some kind of a script, to whatever extent a script works for you. And when I did my talk, that was the process. And it ended with the script. And I went off script a little bit, and I don't really like scripts, and I tend to over-rehearse and overanalyze things that are specced out like that. So we now have like a double diamond process that we use at TEDx Toronto, where we go from idea to stories to outline to script. And we reach that point probably a month and a half before the event with our speakers. And then we tear it apart. Once you've got your script, rather than editing the script, let's go back to the outline format and do our work there and do our improvement there. And once we feel like we've nailed the outline, let's go back to the idea again. Let's go even higher level in our final 2 weeks of preparation and of tweaking.
Oh, I love that, because you're zooming in on the script and you get meticulous about the script. And then the worst thing that can happen for a lot of us is just we start locking on and getting rigid, and then the magic's kind of, the fizz is out of the soda can, and so how brilliant is that to zoom back out to outline and story, put the heart and the soul and the passion back in after they have learned the process of really getting very getting meticulous and getting very detailed in terms of adopting your process. How cool is that?
When I was in high school, I was in a dramatic arts program, and there was a big blanket on the roof of our teacher's staff lounge, which the students took over as their lounge because we were assholes, I guess. Typical actors, divas. And there's a big quilt on the roof of the staff lounge that said the key is always risk. If you're not taking a risk, you're not maximizing your potential. And there are a lot of ways to take risks in the script of a talk. You could deliver a very confrontational and controversial talk that will perturb people and will frighten people and will put people at unease. But the danger of over-scripting it and over-rehearsing it is that you dilute that risk and you turn it into like a vaccine of risk, which is introducing kind of like a noodled, not entirely resilient version of the risk into your presentation. But you as the speaker still feel like, I'm doing something risky. I'm doing something controversial here. I'm putting myself out there. I'm being vulnerable. But to the audience, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're delivering something that you wrote and memorized and you have no worries about it.
And we don't want that. We don't want to pay $50 or $100 for a ticket to watch 20 or 30 speakers. And then even a third of those speakers, if even, 5 or 10 speakers are delivering safe, scripted, not in the way that you prepare, but that really sounds scripted because there isn't any life in it anymore. I mean, that's not helping the brand. That's not spreading ideas. That's not allowing us to be passionate about moving them forward.
Yeah. So at our event 2 weeks ago, one of the speakers I was working with, her name's Dr. Eugenia Duodu, and she runs a not-for-profit organization here in Toronto called Visions of Science that brings STEM education into low-income communities for kids who don't usually have access to good science, technology, engineering, and math experiences. They think it's a subject, not a way of looking at the world. And when they get a C or they fail the subject, they think, well, that's it, I'm done. And so Eugenia works with like a lot of elementary school kids, high school kids, and most of her talk was to be delivered to an audience of adults, to people who needed to be convinced that this stuff was really important and that this mattered. And on the day before her talk, it was feeling a little stale. And we had our outline. She knew where we had like places to wiggle things around and move things around. And I said, who do you really want to be talking to in the last 2 minutes of your talk, Eugenia? And she said, not really the people in the room. And I was like, well, that's very convenient because we're going to put this online. You're going to get 1 million views and none of them are going to be the people that were in the room. Who do you really want to talk to? And she said, I want to talk to the kids. And I was like, that's your closer. Run with it. Speak from your heart and talk to the kids who feel like they've been shut out of the great discoveries of the next 25 years. And she came up with this beautiful little turn of phrase to close off her talk that was like, most people feel like the scientists and the engineers that really make a big breakthrough are celebrities who are always destined to do that. And if it was easy for us as a society to identify the people that had the potential to solve the world's most complex problems, we would just target those people and go deliver them great science and technology education. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. There are Nobel Prizes waiting in the blossoming and evolving in the minds of kids. Even here in Toronto, a fairly affluent and developed city, kids who don't have breakfast in the morning, kids who don't have anywhere to go after school, kids who don't go to school or don't have access to good education in the classroom. They still have that Nobel Prize seed in their mind. They just might not know it yet. And they might not know what to do with it. It might be something they're daydreaming about all the time, but they don't know how to develop it. They don't know how to garden it. And so she talked to these kids that, like, I promise you, if you're listening to this right now, you have one of those seeds in your mind. Everybody's curious. Curiosity is your birthright. No one can take that away from you. And science is not a subject. It's a way of seeing the world. And next time somebody tells you that science is too hard, or they act surprised when you say that you're interested in chemistry rather than in sports, remember that every little comment like that is an opportunity for you to water your own seed and to find people, to find experiences, to find information that waters that seed and grows that plant. Rather than getting shut down from some of the negative comments that you get, some of the feedback that doesn't quite encourage you to be yourself or to try things or to take risks.
Well, how powerful is that to be able to turn it around? Maureen is here in our green room, and I'm going to add her to the little broadcast here. Maureen, how you doing?
Very well. How you doing?
Well, we're great over here. Trevor and I have been warming up the mic for you, so we're looking forward to this.
I spit on it a little bit. I'm sorry.
What I'm going to do is I like to interview from the left, and I think you're already on my right. So I'm going to escort all of us back to the green room, and then we're going to rearrange and and feel free to enjoy. And something I forgot to mention: if your friends, family, fans, wiggle your finger over the share button so that we defeat Facebook in their quest to restrict the throttling back and spread these ideas. I know Trevor has given us a treasure trove of speaker coach advice for getting accepted and then avoiding the trap of being a little too stale in these ideas as we work so hard to give really a career-changing talk for many, many people. And that only happens when you give a killer talk that is worthy of the stage and being spread. So with that, we're gonna go back to the green room. We're gonna reshuffle, and thank you so much, Trevor, and thank all of you. And if you have any comments, questions, it's a good time to type them in and ask. All right. Well, we are back here. Maureen, if you can move your webcam a little bit so that you actually grow a little taller and kind of move it towards you.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
Painting, and that's classical me. I put the art instead of me.
Yeah, no, it looks great. Let's see here. I'm just pulling up your information here. Oh, this is going to be fun. All right.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, I appreciate you being here today, and this is a worthwhile thing to be talking about. mtartagency is the website, correct?
Correct, yeah.
MT Art Agency. Maureen Tanguy. Am I saying your name correctly?
Tanguy.
Tanguy?
Yeah.
Maureen Tanguy. Okay.
All right.
Very good. All right. That's why I ask, because I want to make sure that I say everything right.
So I'm happy with that too.
Great. And Maureen, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, so I don't know if you have like an earbud or something that you can plug in. That'll really help. And yeah, just because it's kind of, I don't know if you remember the old Charlie Brown a little bit, but it's almost like that teach her on the Charlie Brown a little bit. Let's try this. I'm sure this will be better. Now we have a little bit of an internet slowdown. So give me, let's look at the levels right now. If you can give me a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, you sound much better now. Okay. Let's see here. Let's take a look. mtart.agency, and don't invest in art, invest in artists.
Amazing. We can hire you as a publicist. You're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I try to be in there. Now, you know what? The one that I watched was the one about Kim Kardashian versus the art museum versus the Louvre. Which one is that? Because I know you've given a couple. Is that social media visuals affect our minds?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. So we can just talk about, we can just, I really want to kind of get past any individual talk and really just talk backstory, how you prepped, all of that kind of stuff. But we'll use that to ramp up. So any questions for me?
Well, I'm just going to have you guide me. So I'm just ready for it. I trust you. That's basically it.
Awesome. Yeah, very good. All right. Well, with that said, we're going to jump on here, and we are broadcasting, which is good. And we are going to go live on the podcast in 3, 2. We are live with Maureen Tanguy. Maureen, are you ready to talk?
Yes, very excited. Thank you for having me.
Maureen Tanguy is, let's see here. You know what? That's the, I'm going to shut this podcast piece down. That's the missing piece. I don't have your bio here. I need to have that. Let's look it up. That's where it is.
Do you want me to give them my bio? Or?
Well, you know what? That should have been in the piece right there. I'm looking in your bio here on the talk, and that's going to give me what I need. So that's like, you wonder why I was delaying a little bit. It's because I think I'm delaying, but I actually didn't have that bio. So
sorry.
Here we go. All right, here, and then I'm going to hit my little button right there. Maureen Tanguy directed her first gallery at age 21, opened her first art gallery in Los Angeles in age 23, and finally created her current business in 2015. MT Art is the first artist agency promoting influential visual artists and specializing in talent management, building, growing, and accelerating their careers. Maureen was recently honored Forbes 2018 30 Under 30 Europe Art and Culture. She's a thought leader, writer, and frequent speaker on contemporary art. There we go. That's what I.
That's me.
that's what I needed to have. All right, very good. We're going to try this again in 3, 2. We are live with Maureen Tanguy. Maureen, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready. Thank you so much for having me.
Maureen Tanguy directed her first gallery at age 21 and opened her first gallery in Los Angeles at age 23. MT Art is the first artist agency promoting influential visual artists and specializing in talent management, building, growing, and accelerating careers. Maureen was recently awarded the Forbes 2018 30 Under 30 Europe Art and Culture Award. She is a thought leader, writer, and frequent speaker on contemporary art. Maureen Tanguy, welcome to the talk.
Thank you so much.
You've given multiple talks. One is called, the more recent one, How Social Media Visuals Affect Our Minds. The other is called How Artists Can Transform Our Cities. And I love how in the most recent talk, it's really, you're bemoaning the fact that the Louvre has about 10% or 30% of the Instagram reach as Kim Kardashian, who posts a different type of loosely considered art on her Instagram feed. And you basically compare and contrast the two and make some recommendations for how to create a more visually healthy environment. Is that a fair summary? I'd love for you to take us behind the talk, Maureen.
Yes, very fair summary. So obviously, I'm very passionate about how inspiring art is and how that transforms us, that makes us happier, that makes us more inspired every day. Sadly, the reality is not that. So currently, your young girl is spending 5 hours on Instagram a day in the Western world, so America and England, for instance. And she's merely looking at a content like Kim Kardashian, which for anyone who is not looking at it is cosmetics, bottoms, boobs, and things like this. The issue with that is, as funny as it may sound, this is actually affecting her mental health. It's creating more anxiety, body consciousness, and it's just simply not making her happy. Instead, if you look at all the studies that were conducted when people were surrounded by nature or art, it's doing the exact opposite. It's actually making them a hell of a lot happier, healthier, relating to other people and seeing different perspective of the world. So it's something very, very good in that sense. So obviously the challenge is at the time of my talk, she had 116 million followers, and then the Louvre has barely 1 million. Luckily now the Louvre has double, which is 2 million, but this is still 70 times less, which is absolutely enormous. So what I'm very passionate, and it seems to be a similar job for you, is how can we make sure to raise awareness towards the content that actually benefit to us much more? And how can we make sure that everything we've learned in Hollywood marketing, promotion, marketing can be applied to basically a content that's a lot more inspiring? A lot of my artists discuss contents like social diversity, climate change, refugee crisis, so things that actually are things that we need to think about. And I guess I find everything I've learned in LA and Hollywood really interesting, because I feel that if we start understanding those marketing platforms, then hopefully we can pull them towards the content that's necessary. That's that in a very summarized way.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting. You're getting a lot of fist pumps from the green room. I'm watching our guests in the green room. You can't see this right now in the Be the Talk listeners. We have this on a broadcast right now. There's a lot of resonance with what Maureen is talking about. Here's kind of my take on this is really interesting, because when I was growing up back in the dark ages, in terms of visual content, people would, in my environment, they'd say, don't look at that. That's not, in the way that women were portrayed in magazines and things like that. They say, don't look at that. And that was kind of their way of shielding negative visual content. That's not necessarily what you're saying here, but this is an argument for a similar thing of, let's look at the things that elevate ourselves. Let's look at the things that elevate people. And you actually have scientific studies on what happens when we're consuming if you're parenting right now. If you got teenage girls, teenage boys, preteen girls, preteen boys, there's evidence that says if we're filling our Instagram feed with Kim Kardashian and all these other kind of fake feeds, in a sense, fake visuals of modified bodies and all of that, it's not good for us. And it's not just from the old school kind of moral take only. It's all of these other things about, there's no nature, and it's breeding all of this discontent and maybe body shaming and all these other things that you're bringing into it. Why not look at real art instead? Why not look at the Louvre? Why not find out what we can do to be fighting a fair standard instead of an unfair standard? Maureen, I may have taken that in a little bit of a strange direction, but I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
No, I love it. I love seeing people being passionate about that subject. I think it's exactly that, where there's a few issues here. That's the reason I compared looking at visuals in the same way that you eat food. For me, you don't eat 5 hours of junk food a day, or I would hope you not, because it's probably not the best thing you can do. But actually here, that's technically what you're doing. And I'm only counting what you see on social media. I'm not counting adverts when you go outside, and I'm not counting the way basically that surrounds you. So here comes basically the divide, where on the one hand, you have now a lot of young people who wants to be loved, and we all go through that. I want to be respected, I want to be loved, so we want to post content that therefore we think is going to engage our audiences. Someone like Kim Kardashian, and I'm not just pointing my finger at her, I think it's a way wider issue, is therefore doing two things. Not only she is promoting a content that is not an idea, and by not being an idea, you need more of it. If I eat good food, I'm obviously satisfied. I don't need to eat every 2 seconds after that. If you eat something like Haribo's, which I love, or junk food, it doesn't satisfy you, so you have to go back at it every 2 seconds. That's basically what she's doing with that kind of content. The second thing is that she's also saying the way to be loved is by being overtly sexualized, and is by promoting myself in that way. That's really what I found incredibly scary. So I did a study with some data scientists, and actually on me wearing a bikini with my bottom in a bikini, which obviously my mother was in despair of that matter. But the idea was that picture got viewed, the most viewed picture, became the most viewed picture that I had over 8 years of Instagram. And
here's where I got to jump in. Were you expecting that outcome? Was that kind of almost like a bait, or were you despairing as a result of that? Were you really surprised, or did you kind of do that to prove your own point that if you post that kind of a photo on your own Instagram feed, that it's going to be instantly the #1 feed in your 8-year Instagram history?
I mean, I think I expected it to be noticed, but I didn't expect it to be what it became. And in terms of the study, what's interesting is that it's more women who looked than men, because
that's very interesting.
Well, that's where the anxiety and body consciousness comes from. And instead, men have the same, where it's a comparison system. So if I post a picture like this, it creates even more anxiety. So here, there's two things. One, if I don't have a stable group of friends, and I'm lucky to be a little bit older, and obviously I have investors in my business, so I can't post too many pictures of myself in a bikini, I would therefore feel, okay, that's the way to be loved. So I will start posting more of that content. That's me as a poster. The second thing is that you have young girls, therefore, watching this, comparing themselves. And that's something that the good news of art, or in my head in ideas, is that it kind of encourages you to be unique, encourages you to be different, and encourages you to therefore create dialogue between those differences. Something that this is comparable. So you're comparing, does she has enough cellulite or not at all? Does she have skinny legs? So that's comparable. Comparing yourself to other people is literally what creates the most amount of you feeling not really well about it. Like, we've all been through that, like, just if you start looking at people, their lifestyle, and you start comparing more directly, this is not a source of happiness. If you embrace differences, if you embrace dialogues, if you start building yourself from where you are in that sense, you're much likely to be a much happier person. So here, it's not just the person that consumes that's being affected, but it's also the person that posts. Because I think if I was 10 years younger and I was being more appreciated for my bum in the bikini than my intellectual content, I may feel encouraged to post most of that content. And that's where you're basically seeing as a circle of content that's being more and more posted.
I think this is really interesting, and maybe I'm reading a little too much into that. There was an awful lot there. There's too much that we can unpack. But what I just thought that I heard you kind of almost insinuate, or what I'm reading into that is, the purpose of art is really to encourage diversity, a diversity of ways to see the world, different ways of expressing ourselves, different ways of maybe dressing or combining, clothing and fashion and all of that. And it was just so fascinating, because everybody, once you post that picture of the bikini, all of a sudden you get deluged with all of the likes, all of that stuff, which makes you feel a false sense of love. And it works against art, because you're going to, all of a sudden, once you do that, as you found, and maybe you can emotionally, perhaps a part of you can attest to, it's just from this experiment, it's harder to do something artistic, to do something different, to do something that's a little, provocative in terms of against the norm. And all of you want, there's probably this pressure that even you felt to just post bathing suit photos for, ongoing, even though you that works against your goals. And the tie-in to art being a way of diversifying and doing things different and being not afraid to flaunt expectations. That is very ironic for me to realize that the more this kind of photo goes up and the more pressure that we feel, the less artistic that we could arguably be.
And I think it's also realizing the responsibility that we all have in posting, not just, I just listened to the previous speaker in that sense, but not just a type of person, but all of us, because ultimately we are defining our visual landscape by populating, our social media. It's like if I'm influencing what your eyes will see, and, psychologically, I'm basically influencing you in terms of what the world looks like. There's a reason why visuals are much more accessible to us than words. We learn to read years down the line in comparison of how much we take as babies. And that's a big influence in how it shapes you as a person and what you think you may want and what you think you may crave out of what you see. So I think that's really what I'm appealing, is that we all feel insecure, but I'm just asking for not acting on it, especially if you're someone who has a voice, because you end up basically harming people, and it doesn't sound harmful, but it is actually just as harmful in terms of the content. And I think we're just at the start of actually understanding how harmful it is to your audiences in that sense.
Well, this is interesting because, this is highly nuanced right now, but at the same time, even in the last 12 to 18 after, I think, the Me Too movement, as an example, and I'm not making a direct comparison, but I mean, in terms of the privilege of power and the systemic things and the actresses and all of the things that happen. My point is, we have such a higher level of awareness, sophistication, and what's entailed in some of these systemic things now versus 2 years ago, before a lot of this stuff happened. And what I'm starting to read in and see in what you're talking about, Maureen, is it's almost like the visuals that we post as a form of, and I may not be articulating this right, but it's almost like every time we post something of ourselves, it's almost like a social justice thing in terms of, do we choose to post something that is going to incite, flattering kinds of envy from everybody else? It's almost like a narcissistic awareness versus, this is my nice vacation and I'm blessed and I hope that this brightens your day. And this, I worked on my abs and I'm a little bit ripped and I want the accountability, versus, picture after picture of unrealistic things. I think that there's the beginning of a languaging, and maybe you're a lot farther down the road, but I think that maybe 10 years or even 10 months from now, or somewhere in between, there's going to be more of a recognition of, looking at somebody, the whole of what somebody's sending out there, and realizing, is this healthy? Is this not? Should this be almost socially discouraged a little bit? What are your thoughts on that?
So we're launching a big campaign across billboards in London with quite a few people here in London on visual diets, and it's going to be in January. And it's about the fact that it's like your 5 a day. So hopefully inspiring people to look at inspiring visuals as they start the day. I would love that. I think the Me Too movement is a good example of something going viral if you do it well. I think here it's, again, just being aware that we can all be visual role models and we have to lead by examples for it. And therefore we just have to make sure that we're putting the best content out there, and anything that is, and it's always questioning before you post, like, why am I posting? Is that because I want to share something that I think is beneficial to you as a people, which is ultimately the reason why you want to post something? Or is it because I'm insecure and I have different needs? And at that point, maybe, bring your mom or your friends, because they may be better people to deal with it. So I think it's just that self-awareness. And I think it's the same when you consume it. When you start scrolling through an account addictively and you keep on going back about it, just again, I'm addicted to sweets. Like, just have a way of awareness that maybe you've consumed too many of it during that day and you should step out. If you start seeing some mental sign that you're not feeling really great about yourself, and it's been already 30 minutes of that content, have awareness. Like, 5 hours a day is enormous. Like, it's so much time. And I think for us also, who And that's the issue of my industry that obviously we're battling for, is my industry hasn't taken social media seriously for a very long time. And ultimately, it's also for all of us in the cultural space to be realizing that this is where people spend most of their time. And therefore, this is where we should spend, again, our time for the content. It's important to kind of look at audiences on a way larger spectrum and not having also an echo chamber in that sense, because our industry is just as responsible for not having promoted as much good content on those platforms. But again, within those 5 hours, I want people to feel a lot more meaningful, inspired, and thought-provoked than what's currently happening.
Well, we've been enjoying this conversation with Marine Tanguy. We've been talking more about her second and more recent talk, how social media visuals affect our minds. Really fascinating conversation. We're going to pivot over to you, Talk Universe, in the Blitz round. And we're back with Marine Tanguy. It is time for the Blitz round. I'm going to ask her a series of either or questions in the preparation, related to the preparation and performance of her recent talks. Are you ready, Marine?
Okay. I'm a bit scared, but I'm ready.
Oh, no need to be scared. First question off. Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
So yeah, I was invited to speak for this one. The first one was in discussion with the university we were working with. The second one, I started my company saying, this is the reason I founded my company, to give influence to visual artists. And that's because I want them to have as much influence as Kim Kardashian, but with more inspiring content. So the platform TED in Switzerland approached me. And I must say that I didn't have that much research on it at the time. So I had to basically go down and research and make sure that all the facts they were saying were consistent. But they were right. I actually think that subject was even more, it kind of made me think even more about why I was doing the things I was doing.
Yeah, well, talk about the research that you did, because it's really powerful and you make some, bold claims backed by research. And I think that's a piece that a lot of lesser talks don't do. We there's once you're accepted, a lot of people unfortunately use the opportunity as kind of a personal commercial, as opposed to a way to bring these true ideas forth. And that really often requires research to make sure that it's not just an opinion, but an actual fact. So what did you do to research?
So there's also mental health research, and that's very helped for us with NHS, which is the health system that we have here in England. So they will look basically at the amount of time people were spending on apps. We were able to kind of access those facts, access the timings, access the impact of it. Instagram was flagged as the worst. And then we were able to basically look at what the content we could look at into it. This was matched with the Turing Institute, who basically had started with a research that's really interesting on why do we need an environment that surrounds us that's inspiring. And actually, once you start thinking of that, you can bring it into a digital of what, again, you should be consuming of that. So then that helped me in scanning the data, like a similar thing with my bikini picture. We were able to be saying like how people were looking at it, what's the level of addiction and obsessiveness that you go about it. That's much more small scale, because you basically have, like, I asked my friends who were influencers to also help me. It's only so many people that you can ask that to access the analytics. But that was really handy because I'm lucky to have people that had let me into their accounts, into the analytics, and we could therefore go at that. And then we basically also asked people to look at different types of content daily and see how they felt after that, which is also more quantitative research than the big data side. That's more, NHS will be more on the big scale, and then all of this will be more like surveys and study cases. But actually, as much as it was small scale, the answer is always the same. So it's one of those things that you think you have an opinion, but by the minute you expose people to this kind of content versus the user type of content, it's black and white. You will not think great here, and you'll feel a lot healthier here. So.
Well, Talk Universe, I encourage you, don't shy away from doing the research that you need to prove the points and spread the ideas. It's a whole lot harder to overlook and dismiss when you realize that a talk is based on real research and data. And for a lot of places, that they will just ask you that in order to get accepted. You really do need to have research and data and whatnot. My last question, what was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or before you spoke?
So what was the most unexpected? I'm always quite ambitious with what we're going to do. And my artist, because I work with mad people who are incredibly smart but completely crazy. So my artist wanted an augmented reality experience to happen on stage, which is at the end. Luckily, the edit was quite cool because the whole thing glitched in the dark. It finally happened, and it was like almost like a hooray moment because I generally had given hope that it would never happen, and I even prepared to make a joke about it. So that was that. I think also I'm actually someone that is very introverted still about all these things, and I love when people start laughing and they start responding to you, because ultimately the reason I want to be on that stage is to again pass on the content, and it is so lovely when you start and people are really interacting and you really sense that they're on the board. By the minute that happens, sure, same for all speakers, you feel that that's it. You've kind of set the stage to doing something that they're going to think differently about. So for me, that's always that case, is when the audience starts interacting, it changes everything.
Well, we've been enjoying this Blitz round with Maureen Tanguy. You can go to our show notes page at bethetalk.com to watch both of her talks. We'll have links there. Her first talk, How Artists Can Transform Our Cities. The second that we've been focused on right now, How Social Media Visuals Affect Our Minds, as well as we will have a link to her agency. It's mtart.agency. MT for Maureen Tanguy, art.agency. And we'll be back in just a moment with Maureen Tanguy's final word of advice for Talk Universe. And we're back with Maureen Tanguy. What's your final word of advice?
Well, I think in life, sadly, this is going to be something so boring, but just working really hard. I think, as you said, with the research, I think being surrounded by people who work really hard and working very hard yourself, your brain just keeps on coming up with discoveries that you never expected. It's very boring, but actually I think that's the solid foundation of everything.
Well, Maureen Tanguy, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you so much. Let's bring Trevor back. He looks like he's a bit of a fanboy here. Trevor, what do you think of that, man?
Very exciting. We're like idea cousins. The futures you feed yourself are what you get or what you become. You are what you future.
Yes,
you are what you imagine.
I agree.
For sure. Well, thanks to both of you. And again, if you're watching this on social, help us defeat the power of the algorithm by wiggling your finger over the share button. It's amazing. Whenever I bring a cluster of guests on, it's just amazing how they tend to dovetail each other and say things that are so congruent, so valuable. And I want to thank both of my guests today. And then with that, we're going to go offline. So take care, everybody.